Our guest today is Neil Geddes-Ward. Neil is a pagan and visionary artist. His work has appeared on CDs, in books, on TV, and in magazines in the UK, the USA, and in Australia. He is an expert on different occult and paranormal subjects. He is a co-host of the Paranormal Peep Show, and he is the co-author of Fairy Craft, Treading the Path of Fairy Magic. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the program. Thank you for watching.
Hello, welcome to another edition of Unite Planet. Today, our guest is Neil Geddes-Ward. Hello.
Hello.
Neil.
Hi, Johnny. Hi, Paul. How are you both?
Hi, Neil.
All well, good and well.
Well.
Now, you investigate paranormal activity, if you like to call that, and I think you look at all different kind of things, don't you, as well? But is it like investigations with ghosts and I think fairies as well, isn't there? All sorts of UFOs, and you're an artist as well. You've got lots of strings to your bow.
Yeah, I know. I suppose at the very basic level, I'm a very creative individual. So I played in rock bands. I played bass guitar, play synthesizer a little bit, written songs and stuff. But I also do drawing and painting. I've done that ever since I was a kid. And the curiosity about the world, about me, was there from the very beginning, because I remember asking a question once to my mum, and I can't remember what age I was, but I was very little. I said, "Where was I before I was born?" And she said, "Oh, you didn't exist." And I said, "Well, I must have existed somewhere. I couldn't fathom not existing." So there was no answer for that at that point, but I kind of chewed it over for quite a lot of time. But I got into things like Star Trek and Doctor Who at a very young age, and I was always in amazement about the universe and the planets, and loved all that kind of stuff. But there was still the idea of where was I before I was born, and then I used to see things. We used to get like the Reader's Digest. Old people used to leave us Reader's Digests and pass them on to us, and I used to read through them sometimes as a kid. And what struck me is that sometimes they'd have an article in there where someone allegedly died on the operating table, and they'd go through this tunnel of light and communicate with some intelligence that was this light at the end of the tunnel, and say it's your time to go back or whatever. So that kind of thought, well, that's interesting. It sounds like they're sort of dying but somehow living again or something. What's happening there? And then as I got a little bit older, Doris Stokes, the famed medium of the early 80s, came onto the scene, and she appeared on various TV programs, and that sort of struck a chord with me, that she could communicate with these people. So we ended up getting the books as a family, and I used to read some of the books. My mum used to read them as well. And then also there was that really interesting program again in the early 80s, and by the time I was about sort of 16 or 17, the Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World program. So a lot of people mention that as one of those influential kind of series where he would look at all the various mysteries, and one of them was life after death, and they covered the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, where you could see demonstrations of these people doing these amazing things. So obviously there was no internet back then. I just called up Directory Inquiries one day and said, "Could you give me the telephone number for the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain, please?" And the rest is history. I basically ended up going there for readings on the train, and I ended up then, obviously, once I learned to drive, I could get about a bit more, and I used to see demonstrations of mediums at various spiritualist churches. And then it came down to the fact that after a while of having these readings, they said, "Oh, by the way, you can do this sort of stuff." I said, I've never seen a ghost or anything. But it transpired that they felt that I had some sort of ability. So when an opportunity came up to try and develop this ability, I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a go. So I joined what they call a psychic circle, which is just they will sit literally on chairs in a circle in someone's living room, and they have the medium, which is the person that communicates with the dead, if you like. I don't like using the word communicate with the dead because they're not dead, but they would communicate with the dead. That's a very negative term, but I'd say those on the other side. And then they would try and teach you how to develop that same ability. And so you do meditations, and then you try and tune into people and try and see if you can do what they call a reading on them and say, oh, I've got so here or whatever. And I always remember the first thing that convinced me that something was happening was that I had to meditate on someone that's sitting opposite me. And I remember there was this old guy whose house we were in. His name was Eric, but he was probably in his late 60s, a retired chap in his late 60s. And I just remember going into this sort of vague meditation with my eyes shut and trying to concentrate on him, almost to the point of drifting off to sleep. And then I heard this Cockney EastEnders voice pop into my head, like a taxi driver type voice. All right, mate, you know. And the voice said to me, tell him he's got something wrong with his waterworks. And I thought, what? Where'd that come from? You know? And I thought, I've heard this thing before, is that when you've got something embarrassing to say someone that's been given by spirit, you have to what they call wrap the message up. So you kind of censor it a little bit and make sure that nobody else understands it, but only the person that you're giving the message would maybe understand it. You privatize it a little bit. Yeah. But I was a bit young then, and I didn't know how to sense that message. So I thought, well, what do? So rather than just say, oh, you got something wrong with your waterworks, Eric, I thought that might be a bit embarrassing to say that to him in front of all these people. So I just said something, oh, I think you'll see in the doctor about a problem. And that's all I could say, which is such a general thing. But I didn't really know what else it was. And I remember talking to a friend of mine who was a lot older than me, and he said, oh, he's probably got something wrong with his prostate gland. And I didn't even know what a prostate gland was at that time. And he said that can swell up in men when you get to that age, and it can affect your bladder, hence the waterworks aspect of it. And I said, oh, I didn't know that. So maybe I was right. But that was the thing that convinced me that, okay, I don't see ghosts or anything, but maybe I am communicating with something. So I went on and started carrying on in developing circles. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a professional medium that goes out on stage or tour or anything like that. There's plenty of other people far better at that than I can be. But I've done what they call open platform and stuff like that. But I've become fascinated with the whole thing. I've read so many different books on it, spoken to many people, been to demonstrations. And because I'm an artist, I've ended up with the point where I would go and sell my artwork as prints and things to people at events. And sometimes at these events, they would need speakers. And because of my knowledge of these things, I would negotiate a free table to sell my artwork. And I said, I'll do you a free talk. And we had struck that happy medium, pardon the pun. And so when I would do a talk on something spooky or whatever, people inevitably come up to me and tell me their kind of spooky stories, which over the period of many years has accumulated to a lot of different interesting stories, you see. So that's where I'm at. I'm not like a ghost investigator. I won't go around a house with electronic kit trying to detect ghosts and that. To me, whilst it might be interesting for the people that are doing that, and they can do, I'm not stopping them. If they want to do, that's fine. To me, there's more definitive evidence that you can get by going to a seance or to a medium, because when the medium comes through with specific information for you that no one else in that room can possibly know, that to me is a much, much stronger piece of evidence than hearing a door creak in a haunted house, you see, where, you know, like when you go to these haunted houses or graveyards or where these people choose to do these things, it's inevitably cold and pissing down with rain and freezing. There's about 15 people there, and you can't rule out the fact that what you've heard on your tape recorder could be one of them, you know? Yeah. So and even if it is a creak of a door, you know, is it the door creaking, or is it some spook, or is it someone in your group that's done it accidentally? So I just prefer not to go around doing that kind of ghost research. I prefer to go to demonstrations. I've seen some really bad mediums, but I've also seen some really excellent mediums. And so that's where I'm at really with the whole thing.
So have you seen a ghost yourself or a UFO yourself? Have you ever any experiences?
Not seen any UFOs, although I'm greatly interested in the subject of UFOs, but I've never seen a UFO, so I'd love to see a UFO. Interestingly, Stanton Friedman, the great respected UFO researcher, was one of these people. He believed in UFOs, wrote books on them, did talks on them. He never saw a UFO himself, interestingly enough. But yes, I've never seen a UFO. I might have seen one thing that you might call a ghost. And I was staying at a house once in a bedroom. It wasn't my house or anything. And I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw baggy trousers standing in front of me with the top half of a person, but the top half of the person was in the shadows. I couldn't quite clearly see them, but they seemed to be talking to me. And I couldn't sort of make out clearly what they were saying. And I was sort of going, what? And then mumbling sort of noise. And I didn't know what it was. So eventually I sort of fell asleep. But it kind of like thought about it the next day and thought, was that me dreaming? Was I imagining things? Or did I really see something? So I'm not going to say, yes, I've definitely seen a ghost. But if you want to say, have you seen anything? Well, that's probably the nearest I've got to saying I've seen something. However, in the world of mediumship, it's not so clear cut that if you're a medium, you just see a ghost, because there are different aspects of it that you can feel the presence of people or you can feel their thoughts around you. And I'm one of those people. I feel the thoughts of people come through to me, and I might sometimes hear a phrase in my head or something. And that is a clue that someone's with me. And I felt people come through me, and the typical scenario that someone says, I felt a shiver up and down my spine. I've literally had that sort of where it literally takes your breath away because I felt something move into the presence of my energy or my aura or something.
I mean, I think you can sense a presence a lot of time, just day-to-day stuff. Sometimes you just feel like you're not alone, don't you? And I think you can kind of pick that up.
Yeah.
I feel that anyway. I don't know if you do as well. Yeah.
Well, they always say that we've got a sixth sense.
Yes.
So, sometimes you feel like you're being watched and things like that. And what I'm actually currently writing a book at the moment called Encounters with Fairies, Ghosts and Spirits. And I start off with a preface in the book that we are being watched. That might sound a bit unnerving to people, but it seems to be that when mediums come through with messages, they say, I've got your mother here, your father, whoever it may be. And they said they was with you when you went to such and such a place. I mean, a remarkable piece of evidence came through many years ago. I was with my then girlfriend at the time. We'd gone to the grave of her grandfather who died like a year before. So this was the anniversary of his death. And of course, she was quite emotional being at the graveyard. And so we sat back in the car and she had a drink of water. She had a little cry, then she had a drink of water, and then she felt a little bit better. And then we went on our way. And then about a week later, we was at this demonstration of mediumship in a spiritualist church, and we were sitting right at the back, and this old medium suddenly came to us, and he said, I've got your grandfather with me, he said to my then girlfriend. And he said, he says that he was with you when you were at the grave. He said, don't think of him as in the ground because he's not there. He wants you to know he's not in the ground. He's actually here now. And he said that when you were there, he said that you had a cry. And he said, but then he said you had a little drink of water and you felt a lot better, didn't you? And I thought, bloody hell, that's exactly as it happened, So was he there hiding behind a gravestone watching us? I don't think so, So, yeah, some of the evidence is what I would call really specific evidence. I mean, I can relate loads of different stories, if you like. I mean, where do I start? Where do you want me to start?
Well, I mean, is that just with like people contacting like with spirits that have gone to the other side? I mean, there's loads of accounts of that, and I find fascinating, because it's for me everything is like energy. Everything is we're connected to everything. So I'm in the belief, when we pass from this body, it's just the physical that dies. That's because energy lives on. So it's great that people can really connect with this quite in a definitive way. I mean, like we said, we can always sense something is with us, but to get that definitive connection that's powerful. I think it's quite powerful. So if you got any of them kind of accounts,
okay. I mean, as I said, I've seen some really bad mediums that are just so bad they shouldn't even be there. But occasionally I've come across some really cracking accounts. This one was only a few years ago, so I'll relate this one because it's got a kind of bit of a double-edged sword to the story. I'd gone along to see this young medium, and he was probably about 23, only 23 years old, called Ross Bartlett from the Southampton area. And my girlfriend had seen him maybe about 3 months before, and he had given her a message, which was, I won't relate her message because it's private to her, I suppose. But she said, "Oh my God, this guy's good. He is so brilliant." So I said, "Well, I'll see if I can, talk to a friend of mine who runs spiritualist churches in the area that I live at, and maybe he could get him to come up." So to cut a long story short, it was arranged that this Ross Bartlett would come up and do a demonstration. Now, we found the building on the internet, the address we had to go to in the town of Ruislip. Now, I don't know Ruislip at all, but I saw this picture. It looked like a medieval old building with beams and things. So when we finally got there was actually 5 buildings that looked exactly like this. And it's like, oh my God, well, which building do we go in, So we was going in every single building. There was like a function in one room and a wedding going on the other. We thought, oh, crikey. So we finally found the building. And it was amongst all these buildings. They're like a whole group of these buildings look the same. So we finally found it, and we got there a little bit late. The whole thing had started, you see. So there was this guy, an old guy on the door, and he had a white shirt on. And we said, "Oh, sorry, we're a bit late." And he goes, "Oh, there's a couple of chairs just down the side. Go and sit there." He says, "Come and give me the money at the end of it." And we said, "Yeah, okay, thank you." So we kind of sneaked in a bit humblish, thinking, "Oh God, we're late," and sat down to the side of the medium, and he was already doing a reading for someone else. But then at the end of that, he suddenly turned around to me and he says, "I'm coming to the gentleman to my left." And I thought, oh God, I've only just turned up. I'm the late one, and here I am getting a reading ahead of everybody else. I felt a bit guilty. So he said, "I've got a lady here who wants to communicate with you, and her name is like Evelyn or something. I can't remember the name, but I'll say Evelyn for the sake of the discussion." And I said, "I'm sorry, I don't know an Evelyn." And he said, "Well, she says she knows you." And he said, "She's talking about your brother Phil, because your brother Phil takes an interest in the history of the family." And I thought, crikey, well, I do have a brother Phil, and he does take an interest in the history of the family because he goes around graveyards photographing graves of family members, that long departed sort of thing. So I thought, well, that made me sit up. Now I was recording this, so I've got it on recording for anybody that doubts it. The only thing I've got wrong is the name, and I just can't remember what it is. So anyway, then he said, "Evelyn, who's married to Edward." And I thought, sorry, I don't know an Edward in the family. And I really thought, this is confusing. Who is this Edward? So then he said the interesting thing is, "Evelyn is talking about the name Morgan. You're connected with a Morgan. And Morgan is the name of my daughter." So I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I've got a daughter called Morgan." And then he said, "Now, just see that man over there with the white shirt? And that's the man that was at the front door taking the money." I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, that man over there, his name is Chris Hayes." Now, I know that name doesn't mean anything to you guys, but as soon as he said that, I thought, oh, my God, I know the name of Chris Hayes. Now, this Ross Bartlett then said, "And Evelyn is telling me," and he was actually unsure himself. He wasn't sure if he was giving this information rightly, because to him it sounded too fantastic. But he said, you could see him thinking about this. He's going, "Okay, we'll go for it." He says, "See that man over there in the white shirt? His name is Chris Hayes." And I kind of gulped and went, "Yeah." He said, "They're telling me that Morgan, i.e. my daughter, is also connected to a Chris Hayes." And I said, "You're absolutely right. My daughter at that time was going out with a guy with the name of Chris Hayes as well." So I thought, what's the chances of that? What is the chance of that, being connected to me? I've just walked in the room. They're telling me the name of my daughter, Morgan. They're telling me the name of my brother. And they've just said my daughter's boyfriend, Chris Hayes, and the fact that the guy in the room is called Chris Hayes. They connected a 3-way thing going on there. And I thought, what is the chance of that? And there's all these skeptics that accuse them of cold reading or being vague or saying Barnum-type statements, which are very vague statements, saying, "Oh, you feel a lot better today," or you're shy in front of strangers, or whatever. They're Barnum-type statements. But this was nothing like that. This was absolutely accurate. Now, the only thing I couldn't relate out of that reading was this name of Evelyn, and I couldn't work it out. Why can't I pick up this Evelyn? Because she's saying she's upset that you don't recognize her. I thought, well, I don't know anyone called Evelyn. So when after this written, there was more information that come through, but I thought I'd just give you the stronger stuff there. After that reading, a few days later, I was with my mum, and I said to her, "Do you anyone called Evelyn in the family?" And I played her the recording so she could hear it. And she goes, "No, I don't know who Evelyn is." So then she rang around my family and she spoke to my dad's sister my Auntie Sue, as we call her. And she said, oh, yeah, I know who Evelyn is. And my mum said, well, who is it? And she goes, that's your Auntie Doris. And apparently, the lady that I grew up with, Auntie Doris, as I believe her name was Auntie Doris, her name wasn't that at all. Apparently, Doris was her middle name and Evelyn was her first name. And then it all fell into place because I remember Auntie Doris being married to Uncle Ted, Edward. Edward was mentioned in the reading. So apparently at some point in her history, she decided that she would use her middle name of Doris to be her first name, and Evelyn was chucked into the middle name, and no one ever knew that apart from my dad's sister. And yet here she was coming back with that information, Evelyn, because I had to then do my homework and backtrack it and try and find that, you see. So yeah. I mean, if it'd been great if Auntie Doris had said Auntie Doris with the missing fingers, because her little finger was missing from that hand and her little finger was missing from that hand. Now I didn't understand why as a kid. Why every time I'd see her she had a finger missing, and then a few weeks later she had that finger missing, and I thought she had some sort of weird hobby going on where she'd like to have her fingers taken off. But it turned out that apparently she had diabetes and her fingers had to be chopped off every few months by the surgeons to sort of keep her going. I just thought it was some weird hobby that she had going. But yeah, that was her coming back to me all those years later, and saying a kind of bit of a cryptic clue to who she was. Wow. And then connecting up the name Chris Hayes to my daughter's boyfriend, which was absolutely fascinating. So it's evidence like that from mediums that you think, well, okay, if this is some sort of clever, really clever sort of ploy, that's a lot of planning gone into that. Yeah. And also the thing is, I arrived late to that building. Now I could have walked around there and thought, oh, sod it, I can't find the place, I'm giving up, I'm going home, because I hadn't lost any money because I didn't pay any money. You know, we'll just go for a drink out or something instead. But I persevered and we got there, and it's almost as if that they had that information waiting and they pounced on me as soon as I got through the door virtually, because that was a really good hit for them to get across, and they weren't going to let that go. They said, no, this is good because he's called Chris Hayes and so is his daughter's boyfriend called Chris Hayes, and this is a really good connection to make. So that's a really sort of synchronistic or serendipity type of moment, you see.
I think it was obviously it was meant to be there as well. You know, it was the way circumstances were dictated. It seemed in a spiritual sense that you were meant to be there, like maybe throughout that day you was guided, you know, to be there because their messages were there for you, you know. I mean, that's why I thought, you know, I think that's how certain things work.
Yeah, you know. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The skeptic angle is that, you know, it's got to be tested. There's got to be at least 5 scientists there and things like that. Sometimes you just can't arrange that sort of thing of getting 5 scientists in a room when that sort of thing happens. And basically, even if 5 scientists were there and they said, yeah, this is true, the skeptics won't want to believe it. It's still that sort of thing. They just will not accept it. So you just have to say, okay, well, you know, you're the one that's losing out on it, really. I'm not saying they're going to go to hell when they die. There's just that when you pass over, apparently, if you kind of open-minded about this sort of stuff, it's easier to accept it. So that when you do transition over, you would kind of go, oh, yeah, I've passed over to the other side. This is heaven, spirit world, afterlife, call it what you will. But when those people are skeptics pass over, they think, what's happened? What's happened? You know, and they just can't work out what's happened to themselves. And apparently there are guides or teachers on hand that when you do pass over, they help you to the other side. I mean, an interesting thing that happened actually concerns my mum, and it concerns what people would refer to the Ouija board. The team that I worked with on this, they prefer to call it the spirit board. But back in 2016, my mum wasn't feeling very well. I was actually at their house that evening because I got my Apple Mac computer in one of the old family bedrooms, and I was editing a video. Funny enough, it was Ben Emlyn Jones, your friend of mine.
Oh,
I was editing a video with Ben interviewing someone, and I was completing that. And I suddenly got my dad or my mum shouted up the stairs saying, do you want to come downstairs and watch Time Team? Because it's featuring a local town, which is close to us here. So I said, oh, yeah, okay. So I took a break and made him a cup of tea. And we watched Time Team. After about an hour, I said, right, who wants another cup of tea? Made them both a cup of tea. And then I went back upstairs and carried on editing the video. Now, my mum normally went to bed about 10:30 at night, and my dad would stay on and watch football or war documentaries, anything like that. But on this particular occasion, he shouted up the stairs at 10:30. He says, "Neil," he says, "your mum's not feeling well, and she wants me to go to bed with her." I went, "Oh, okay." And I thought that was a bit odd. Why does my mum suddenly want my dad to go to bed with her? It's like I almost got the thing that she sounded a bit frightened, but I didn't know why. Because when she's not felt well before, she's just gone to bed. But on this particular occasion, she felt a bit disturbed that she wanted my dad to be there. So she made it slowly up the stairs, and I was sitting in this bedroom, and I had the door ajar. So I just sort of poked my head around the door and said, "Oh, I hope you feel better in the morning." But as I said it, I had this weird feeling inside of me, like something you just couldn't sort of ignore, that I thought, I don't feel sincere saying that. I don't feel right saying that. Something in me don't feel right. And I wasn't sure what it was. So there's two things. Why is my dad going to bed with her at night at this time? And why don't I feel quite happy about what I've just said? So anyway, I finally went to bed about an hour or two after that. I actually went and slept on the sofa because all the other spare bedrooms have been turned into model rooms or God knows what else, edit suites and things. So I went and slept on the sofa, put the earphones on, was listening to something on YouTube, but I heard this weird knocking noise in the background. Eventually, I thought, what's all that bumping? My dad was shouting downstairs that he couldn't wake my mum up and she had fainted. So to cut a very long story short, I went up there and looked, and she was absolutely as white as a sheet. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh my God, I think she's dead." And, I felt her neck. There was nothing happening. So we rang the ambulance came, and they were trying to resuscitate her and things like that, but to no avail. So by about 4:00 in the morning, she was declared dead, which is obviously a big shock to us, and you're sitting there and you're waiting for undertakers and policemen. I don't know if you know this, but when someone dies suddenly at home, policemen have to be called by the ambulance service because they have to rule out any foul play. And so policemen have to be called, and they check on her and stuff like that. So anyway, fast forward about 10-12 months later, I was at my girlfriend's place in Dorset, and we suddenly get a phone call, and the phone call was from a friend of hers, and she said, "Heavenly Voices." Now this is the team that have this spirit board. We had heard of this team. They're based in Poole in Dorset. "Heavenly Voices have got a cancellation, and would we be the extra bums on seats, because they've asked for someone out on Facebook if they want to take up this spare slot." And so a friend of a friend basically said, "Yes, we'll do it." And they said, "Well, look, if you do it, you've got to get 4 other people to be there with you to make it worthwhile for us to come over." So a quick scramble on the phone calls roundabout, and we were called up to be those extra bums on seats. So we said, "Yeah, okay." So I just took my tape recorder along there as a kind of an emergency thing. They didn't really know me. I'd never met them before. And all these people were having their readings. And so I was like the last, but all their readings were coming through absolutely accurate. It's vital information. So my mum, I say my mum, I didn't know who it was coming through, but the letter M was given, spelt out on this board, and my mum's name was Margaret. And now they had a protocol where they would say, "Right, can you give your son's middle name, his date of birth, and something else?" But my mum broke that protocol. She just whizzed through, and the glass spelt out with all our fingers on this glass, "Hi, son." Now, my mum never called me son ever in her lifetime. She'd say Neil, whatever. She'd never say son. But when I thought back to it, I thought what she's doing is making me aware presumably there's only so much energy left. So you try and do it in the best way possible. So she wanted to let me know, it was mum coming through. So how do you let you know? You say son. Because there's only one person in the spirit world that's going to call me son, because my dad's here on earth. It's got to be my mum. So I knew straight away it's my mum. She said, "Hi, son." And then they said to her, "Can you say what Neil's middle name is?" And the glass whizzed round, and it couldn't give the information. So, "Oh, it's fake. They can't get information." But what it is, I've noticed, and this is something I've sort of experimented with, is that when there's 2 pieces of information to give, they're pondering about which it is. Because the thing is, I've got 2 middle names. And so she's thinking, I presume, which middle name do I give? Alexander or Lyndon? because I'm Neil Alexander Lyndon Geddes-Ward. So she went to the A first of all, then it went a bit skewy, and I think that information, it confuses the energy in some way. So I said, oh look, don't worry about giving my middle name. What's the name of my dad? And then suddenly, without fail, it went to Bryan, which is Brian. Now, a lot of people spell the name Brian Brian, but my dad spells it with a Y, you see. So she spelt that absolutely correctly. So as another verification question, I said, okay, what's the name of my brother born in 1968? And without fail, it whizzed through and said Philip, which is the name I mentioned to you earlier. She spelled Philip, born in 1968. So then it was a kind of free-for-all chat between me and my mum, who'd only died like 10 or 11 months earlier. And so one of the first things, because like when you suddenly presented this, you're thinking, oh my God, what do I ask? Suddenly, what do I ask my mum who's in a spirit world? What do I say to her? So obviously it's quite an emotional and uplifting time. So I said, have you met your mum and dad, my grandparents? And she said, yes. And then she volunteered extra information. And this bit shocked me because a few weeks before my mum died, my brother, who's also into the psychic stuff, he said he smelt the tobacco smoke of my granddad. That's my mum's mum, my granddad Bob as well. He could smell that around the house. And so that's normally a sign from the spirit world that says that if you smell something from a relative, that's normally a sign that someone's going to die. And it's like them letting you know as best way they can that they're preparing to bring someone over by giving you a clue. So they'll try and do it in either visually, they might show you a face or something, or sometimes the easiest way is to let you have what they call a clairsentience, which is where you smell things. And he could clearly smell the tobacco smoke of my granddad Bob. So I assumed from that, after she died, I assumed, well, maybe my granddad Bob had come to collect her from the spirit world. So it came as a complete shock that when I was on this session, she had suddenly said, yes, my mum came and met me. I went, oh, well, that's nice. But I thought it might be my granddad. I thought, bloody hell, my granny Bob, as we called her, came and collected my mum. So she obviously took her to the spirit world, you see, and when you go there, there's always someone there to collect you, whether it's a spirit guide or a relative or a friend. There's always someone there to show you the ropes, as it were. Imagine, like as a kid, you're going to go to the big school now, and you might have an older brother or sister who already goes to that school, so they'll take you there on that first day and show you around. It's that kind of thing. That's the kind of feeling I get from that sort of thing. But she came through with some absolutely brilliant, cracking evidence. And then, like a year later, I had a second reading from her. And I really put her through her paces this time, which you've obviously seen that reading, which I sent you the video for. That was the second reading. What was your thoughts on that?
Brilliant. Yeah, actually very, very emotional, to be honest with you. And lots of basically proof it was genuine. Yeah, I mean, it was, I was trying to watch it and I'm thinking like when it was going round and round and round, she was actually trying to think of the answers, like you said, about the middle names as well. She was like, I don't know which one to give. I can see the confusion.
Yes, yeah, and a bit of interest in that one is that if you recollect that, as I said, I'm an artist, and we grew up watching Star Trek, and she loved Star Trek, and I kind of got Star Trek from her really, but she always had a bit of a crush on Mr. Spock. You see, that's right. We used to laugh about it, and she wasn't really an artist. I got my artistic ability from my dad. So I thought, I'm going to ask a really interesting question that, no one in this room would know. It's only me that knows about this. But I remember as a kid that we had this old fireplace. There's no central heating. But eventually I think we did get a gas fire at some point. But to stop the chimney blowing out soot or whatever, or drafts coming down the chimney, we put a board in front of it, like a bit of hardboard. And we never had reams of paper like we do today, like people have reams of paper for their printers. We just had scraps of envelopes to draw on in the 70s as a kid. But for one weird reason, I don't know why, she took the board out of this fireplace, and with a felt tip pen, she drew a really good large likeness of Leonard Nimoy, the actor, as Mr. Spock from Star Trek, complete with the pointed ears and everything. And we were looking and go, oh, that's really good, Mum, that's really good. And anyway, she forgot about it. Of course, the board had to go back in front of the fireplace to stop the draft coming out. So it was put back there and we all forgot about it, And then years later, the house was refurbished, central heating was put in, and the board must have been thrown away, I guess. So I remembered this board episode with this picture, and I said, do you remember drawing a picture on the board? And she says, yes, or something like that, she said. So I said, can you give me the name of the person you drew? Now, of course, the glass whizzed round because she didn't know whether to say Mr. Spock or Leonard Nimoy. So that's why you saw me in the video say, okay, just give me the actor's name. Don't worry about the other name. And that's that thing. Which one do I? And it causes like a bit of a time lag about which one do I do. So as soon as I said, just give me his first name, she spelled Leonard. She spelled it slightly wrong, but that was good enough for me, Leonard Nimoy. She got one letter wrong, but that, you know, I mean, what's the chance of that happening? You know, and the glass is moving. You can see the glass is moving. We're trying to keep up with it. So it's not me physically pushing that glass around. It's quite amazing evidence. And of course, there was other questions there that I thought was cracking evidence. And my girlfriend said, I've drawn a picture. Who was it of? And she said me or something like that, you know, and she had done a portrait of her. And then I said, okay. And the other interesting piece of information, again, concerns Chris Hayes, who we mentioned in the earlier story, because I said to my mum, where have I been recently? And she put Orkney Islands. Now, for those that don't know, the Orkney Islands are a group of islands off the north coast of Scotland. Now, I used to live there some years ago, so my kids still have grown up there. So I go and visit them 2 or 3 times a year, except obviously this year in this COVID-19 year, bloody anything. So I said to her, where have I been? And she put Orkney Islands. Now I say Orkney, I never say Orkney Islands. So again, she said it in her typical way, Orkney Islands. And you heard the guy Andy in the talk say, "Where's Orkney? Where's Orkney?" And I said, you know, I explained to him, so he didn't even know what we were talking about. And I said, "And who have I gone to see there?" And she spelled out daughter. And so the girl who's with the Heavenly Voices team, Lisa, says, "And what's the name of his daughter?" And she's correctly spelled out Morgan. And then my mum took it over. She wasn't going to be asked any more questions. She was going to tell you her opinions. She said, "I like her boyfriend." So that reminded me of a story, is that when I first introduced my daughter's boyfriend to my mum, I said, "Oh, mum, I'm going to introduce you to Morgan's boyfriend. His name is Chris." She goes, "Okay, so I'll be bringing him along later tonight, and, you know, you'll meet him." So, of course, he comes in. This is obviously when she was alive. He comes in the living room, and she goes, "Hello, Stuart." And I went, "Stuart? Where'd you get the name Stuart from?" And poor Chris was embarrassed because obviously that's not his name. She goes, "I don't know." She goes, "I thought his name was Stuart." I said, "No, I told you his name was Chris." So, of course, it became a bit of a family joke. So, of course, in this reading that you saw on the video, I said, "What did you call him?" And she said, "Stuart." And I said, "Yeah, and what's his real name?" She put Chris. I said, "Yeah, you embarrassed him, poor boy." And then you see the glass move, and she goes, "Was funny." And that's an expression that she always you say, "Yeah, that was funny." It's always so the character came through that reading, which I thought was really, really interesting.
Yeah, and also the eagerness as well, that she wanted to give the message to you. It was very obvious.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there's lots of people that say, "Oh, they're just feeding you information, or your information is being picked up and they're moving the glass around." But I say, well, look, hang on. If Heavenly Voices are Economy, the duo that do this, they've got to go through a hell of a lot of personal, family, secret history, little anecdotes, and nobody else. They didn't know about that board on the fireplace with Leonard Nimoy's drawing on it. They didn't know that my mum got Chris's name wrong as Stuart and things like that. How would they possibly know that? You see, that is absolutely personal information. And that wasn't just for me. My girlfriend had a reading before that, and everything was personal to her, and all the other people that had a reading as well. So that to me was really, really strong evidence that there's something coming through. And of course, I've had readings and demonstrations of mediumship before through other people. I mean, a few weeks after she died, I think after the first Heavenly Voices session, I was actually at this. My girlfriend said, "Oh, do you fancy going to one of these haunted pub sessions?" I'm not really into going around haunted pubs, but she wanted to go, so I said, "All right, I'll come with you." So it was this medium guy that we'd seen once before at one of the spiritualist churches, and he was doing this thing where we're going round and trying to listen out for noises and stuff like that. Now, at the time, I'd got not this phone. I got another old mobile phone, and it would want to do an automatic backup on it. And I could never work out how to figure that to let it do it. But it would alert you to the fact that it wanted to do an automatic backup. It would do like a little noise, a little chime noise, and it'd sound like bottles. It'd go ding, 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 like that. And so, of course, it would do that quite without me, intentionally pressing any buttons. It'd just do it by itself. So I'm walking around this haunted pub, and everyone's trying to listen for the sound of the dead barmaid who hung herself because she was pregnant or something stupid like that, And then you hear this ding-ling, and this girl goes, "Oh, I can hear bottles. I can hear bottles." And of course, it was my bloody phone going off, you see. And this is why I don't like doing these sorts of things, because they're just random noises sometimes, things you can't control. But what was interesting about that, which was totally unexpected, is that he got out a small table, and put it on one of the pub's tables, because by this time, all the people that in the pub had gone home, and it was just us researchers, if you like. And he put it on this pub table. The idea is that we're all going to put our hands on this table and do what they call table tilting. And now, when you've done table tilting before, people will lean over and it hurts your back after a while, lean and hold your hands on it. So he obviously recognised this fact. So by putting it on a secondary large table, we're putting our hands up there instead of down there. We're not hurting our back so much, but it still makes your arms ache. But the table started to rock backwards and forwards, and there's 3 or 4 people with their hands around this table, and the medium isn't even touching it. He's sitting further away, having a drink, and he's just sort of saying, "Yeah, do that, and I'll watch you." So we're doing it, and the table starts leaning forward towards me. And he said, "That's normally an indication," he said, "that there's someone coming through and they want to speak to you. The fact it's leaning towards you." So through a process of elimination, I said, "Are you someone that knows me?" And it leant forward. So I took that to be a yes, because there's no letters it can spell out. It's literally a rocking motion. So I said, "Are you male?" And it didn't move. I said, "Are you female?" And it moved towards me. "Are you a relative?" And it moved towards me. "Are you my mum?" And it moved towards me. So I thought, right, this sounds like it's my mum coming through this table now. So again, through a process of elimination, I said, "I want you to move the table towards me if I give you a name, a word that's familiar to you. I'm going to give you some names of roads. And when we get to a road that you recognize, I want you to move that table." So I said different names of roads. I went through about 3 or 4. And as soon as I got to the name Lovell Road, the table moved towards me. And the reason it got to Lovell Road and the table moved is that's the road she lived in. So that was why it had a bearing on her. So my mum was now trying to communicate through this table, bless her, which was totally unexpected. But that's a long, lengthy process, because it's a case of 1 rap for yes, 2 for, it takes ages to get any sort of message through. But other people started getting their fathers through and things like that. And through a process of elimination, they managed to almost have a chat with them just by this table rocking. But the other astounding thing about this table thing is that a table has 4 legs, and when the table leans up, it's leaning up on 2 legs at such an angle that it would fall over. Gravity would fall over, and all you're doing is resting your fingers gently like that. So there's no way you're holding that table up your fingers. And the guy who was the medium says, "Now I defy you to try and push that table back onto the floor. So where it's on 2 legs, push it back so it's rested on all 4 legs." So I tried pushing it, and honestly, it was almost like as if this thing was glued in position, which to me defies physics, because you should be able to push that thing back. But somehow there's some force there, some energy, whatever you want to call it. It was stopping me pushing that table back in its normal position. So that's what they call physical mediumship, where physical things are happening. It's not just mental clairvoyance, which is where people are conveying readings through their mind. This is something physical, and that's also the same thing for the Ouija board or the spirit board session. That's called physical mediumship as well. At that point then, the woman stood up and the young girl stood up, and they turned and walked away. He said as they walked away, he noticed they both had cloven hoofed feet, rather like on a goat. And they trotted away or clip-clopped away. She was doing physical mediumship, where she was manifesting dead sailors that were coming out of her seance cabinet and saying, "I've gone down on the HMS Hood."
Have you known any, because you hear a lot of stories of with the Ouija board, like bad spirits coming through as well. Because I mean, I've done a Ouija board a couple of times years ago, and we did it one time, and we got some decent, some good spirits through, and it was kind of all right. One come through, it was saying that it was right behind us, and there was a dent in the bed and all, and it was that wasn't frightening at all. In fact, it was quite relaxing when we was doing it. And then we were telling this other friend about it, and they were skeptics, and they were saying, well, come along, we'll do a Ouija board and come and see for yourself, and we brought her around, and she was totally skeptical. She wasn't, she all thought it was nonsense. So we went on the Ouija board, and she had a thing on the glass and everything, and the spirit came through, and we're asking it questions, and it was answering but not making any sense. It wasn't spelling out any words that made any sense. So she was being a skeptic. She was going like, "What's the matter? Can't you spell like that?" And it went A, B, C, D. So that convinced her then that something is there, because she'd angered the spirit. She'd angered the spirit. And we were all like, whoa, because the glass was really packed. We couldn't stop the glass. We couldn't stop the glass. It was doing all the alphabet really strong and went straight to the middle. It was like, oh. I mean, she was crying, but it convinced her. So I was wondering if you've ever witnessed that kind of thing happening, where not so much bad spirits, but kind of annoying them, and you get in that kind of negative.
No, I've never had the negative. Now the thing is, people say, "Oh, it's only bad spirits that come through." So I say to them, "Okay, bad spirits, you have nothing to do with it. Don't have anything to do if you think it's bad spirits.
Yeah.
So why are you going on Facebook talking to complete strangers then? Some of them could be bad spirits, but they're quite happy to talk to these people." So I think with anything, you got to treat it with some sort of level of respect. But the people that ran this session, Heavenly Voices, they were advised by their spirits, if you like, to do what they call an opening and closing prayer. And it's like a declaration saying, okay, this is our business terms. We're going to only have good people come through that we love and respect, blah, 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 blah. And then we'll shut the door again. So in the same way that you might have, say, a business, and they might have someone on the reception desk or a security guard at the door, they're there to keep undesirables out of the business that might interfere with the process of their daily business. And the spirit guide on the other side is there to do a similar sort of job. They are the doorkeeper, if you like, for these seances. Yeah. Now, you could start off as a bunch of teenagers and get something bad through. I'm not saying that's never likely to happen. It possibly could, but that's because you've done it the wrong way, So that's why it's always a good idea to do these things gently and learn in a circle of older people that have done this sort of thing. But I suppose curiosity killed a cat, and people will do these things, and they might get their fingers burnt. But it's only a tool in itself, in the same way that, you have a TV, you can watch lovely programs on it, you can watch really horrific programs. You have the choice for the channel, you see. And if something does bad come through, then you just close the session down. You don't sort of hang around and keep it there. Like in the same way that if you got a bad person in your house, you don't sit there and entertain them for the rest of it. You show them the door, get out of my house. So it's the same sort of thing. Now, I spoke about the fact that someone is always there to meet you on the other side, to try and meet you anyway. And you talked about skeptics there. This is an interesting story, which kind of highlights a few things like that. I used to do tarot card readings many years ago. It's one of those tools that kind of got me into the mediumship, because I actually found that I was getting intuitive stuff coming through the mind rather than just through the tarot cards. So that's why I kind of went down the mediumship thing rather than just try and do fortune telling as such. But in the early days, people used to come to my house. I used to do readings for them. And then one day this old lady rang up and she said, "Can you come to me? I don't drive." And I thought, kind of groaned about it privately to myself, but I thought, well, okay, I'll do it. So I got her address, and this is before the internet. It took a bit of time and found it. And she lived in this small little kind of old people's bungalow somewhere. And I gave her the reading and sort of went through and told her things. Lasted about 40 minutes, and she goes, "That's very interesting. That's very accurate." But she goes, "There's one thing you haven't told me." And I said, "Well, what's that?" She goes, "You haven't told me about my husband." And I said, "Well, look, if I felt your husband around, I would have definitely said I feel your husband. But I said, I haven't found anything of your husband here." And she goes, "That's interesting." She goes, "Let me show you this." And she said, "In this bedroom, my husband spent the last year of his life ill on the bed. And he was so ill you had to have an oxygen mask to keep helping him breathe. And she goes, every day that I try and straighten his pillows up, make him more comfortable. And one day she said she was lifting his pillows up, making him feel more comfortable. And he was saying, I feel so ill. I feel so ill. I want to die. And she says, with that, he actually just died in her arms. So, of course, she was shocked that her husband just slumped dead in her arms. And so she laid him back down. And she said she saw this vaporous mist coming out of his chest. She said it went up towards the ceiling, went across into the corner of the bedroom, and went into what you'd call the airing cupboard or the immersion eater cupboard or something. And, went in there. Then she goes, I told my doctor this, she said, 6 months later, but he didn't believe me. He just laughed at me. She goes, 6 months later, I woke up in the night and she said, I saw, and she's an old lady, she said, I saw a red Indian coming out the cupboard and he was doing this like that, like scrabbling, trying to come out. She goes, I could only see him from the waist upwards. And she said, I could see the bone necklace around him. She had some sort of war paint on him, but he had the full feathered headdress, bare chested, but she could only see him from the chest upwards doing this. And she goes, behind him, she saw a man in the shadows. Couldn't quite clearly see who it was, but there's definitely a man behind him. And she said she thought she saw a man further, a third man behind that one with a bowler hat or something on. But she says, I could definitely see the red Indian. And I said, well, what happened? She says, he was just trying to come out of the cupboard like that. But she says, I'd see him every night. It wasn't just a one-off. She was waking up at 3 a.m. every morning and seeing this Indian coming out of the cupboard. So she said, what do you think it is? And I said, well, have you heard of spirit guides or anything like that? And she goes, no. This old lady had not got a clue what was happening. So I gently explained to her what I thought was likely happening. I said, look, when your husband died, the mist you saw coming out of his body, I think was his soul or spirit, if you like. And I said, it went into that cupboard over there. I said, I think your cupboard in the corner, because you saw something coming out of it 6 months later, I think it's like a revolving doorway in a hotel. You can go through it and you can come out of it. And I said, it's acting like what they call a portal between this world and the next. And it becomes like a gateway. And I said, your husband was sucked into it and was taken somewhere, I suspect. And I bet your husband did not believe in any of this kind of stuff. And she says, that's right. He thought it was a load of old rubbish. And I said, well, that's the key. I said, he can't come back by himself to talk to you. So he's using this spirit guide, this Native American Indian, as like a bus driver, if you like, and he's going to bring him the journey back for you to speak to him. But obviously this spirit guide quite can't make full contact, but he's there. So the reason that you get these Native American spirit guides, and they tend to be Native American, not always, you can get monks, you can get Chinamen and things like that, maybe nuns as well. They tend to be spiritual people. The Native Americans are much more in tune with nature than the Western man, if you like, who was just totally immersed in materialism. The Native Americans were immersed in their environment. They talk about the Great Spirit, which was their version of God and stuff like that. So they're quite kind of in tune with that spiritual side of them. So that when they go to that side of life, they pass over, they're much more on a higher level of understanding of what's going on. And so they act as teachers and guides on the other side to people. So I suspect that because her husband, not having maybe much intelligence, thinking it was all a load of rubbish, finds himself dead, is taken to the spirit world by someone. And then he says, I want to see my wife. And they said, well, look, we can perhaps get you back there, but we have to do this route. Your wife hasn't gone to see a medium, but we'll try and visually show her that you're here. And they brought him back through that portal of the immersion eater cupboard, the airing cupboard. And the spirit guy was trying to breathe the first one through. So she goes, well, what do I do about it? I said, well, talk to the Spiritualist Association of Great Britain or the College of Psychic Studies, both in London. Call them up on 192, which is direct inquiries. Call them up. I said, tell them exactly what you've told me and see if they can offer any further advice. And I left it with that. I just didn't know what happened to her. She's probably dead now because this is like 25 plus years ago. So she's probably gone to join him now. Now, the interesting thing about this cupboard is that in seances, what they call physical seances, which I mentioned earlier, they will have physical mediums. So there's people like Helen Duncan. In more modern times, you've got a guy called David Thompson from New Zealand. and other physical mediums, they will have what they call a seance cabinet. And in more modern times, I've seen mediums using what would be a toilet tent. If you think you're going camping, you see people with a toilet tent made of canvas on the campsite. More modern mediums have bought those and use them as that what they call their cabinet. Now, in years gone past, they'd have a structure like a kind of box. The medium would sit there, maybe in the chair, often strapped up and taped up to kind of rule out fraud that it's not them that's doing it. And that would manifest, or the ectoplasm, if you like, would come out of the body, which is a kind of a substance that would form in a seance room, and it would come out the body of the medium in some way and solidify for a temporary amount of time into the form of a spirit of how they used to be on Earth. And I asked the medium, I said, why do you have to have these cabinets? And he said, it helps build up the energy. So the analogy that I tell people, there's a couple of analogies I use, is that, for instance, if you're going to make a cake, you take a cake mix, which is a liquid form, and you pour it into a cake tin. It's liquid. Now you put it in the oven, but it's not going to turn into a cake, is it, until you shut that oven door, because the heat is escaping. The heat has to be kept at a certain temperature. So you shut the oven door, and that lets the heat and the temperature go up, and it changes the chemical form of that liquid into a more solid state, which becomes your cake. And another analogy is that imagine a TV. Now, in the old days, we had TVs that used to put in the corner of a living room, and they had a valve, which is a vacuum, where they'd fire a photon in the back of the valve through this tube, hence the word tube, and it hit the screen from the inside, and it'd run backwards and forwards across the TV screen. I'm doing it here across the camera, so you can get. And it'd be one little photon, but it'd race across there 50 times a second, so quick, or 50 hertz a second. So much so that it'd build up a trace of an image. Now, if you didn't have the sides of the TV here and the sides of there, that photon would run off into space and you'd never see it again. So you have to have this box-like structure to contain that image so that it gets traced across and build up the image of a person. So again, with that analogy, I suspect that these seance cabinets have to have that structure there for that energy to bounce around to build up that mixture, build up the ectoplasmic form or a visual form. And I suspect in the case of this lady's house with her airing cupboard, it was acting like a seance cabinet because it was a box-like structure where you could build up a form, and it could act as a portal as well, bringing these people in. And I've built up this theory now to the extent of that when people have said, oh, I saw a ghost, or it's my auntie so-and-so, I said, where were they? They said, oh, they were standing in the doorway. And again, it's the doorways, it's the cupboards in people's houses where these spirits are mostly seen, because I think they're using the natural structure of the building to help build up that visual image, you see. Where you can see ghosts go down roads and things like that. But I think it's the most common way of getting through is that they're going to use the environment in some way to help manifest their energy. And so if there's a structure there like a doorway, that's where they'll appear. If there isn't, they might use something like trees as a kind of a weak structure to bounce that energy around. But most commonly, doorways seem to be the way that they'll be seen in. And I remember on this haunted TV show program I saw many years ago, this guy was talking about the fact that he was working at his computer one day, but he said he felt a presence of someone watching him. And he said it was in the doorway behind him. But he said he looked around, there's no one there, but he felt strongly there was something standing in the doorway. And they got these ghost hunters in, researchers, paranormal researchers, and they was going around there with all their little EMF meters, gadgets and things like that. And they measured and they said, yeah, there's a lot of electromagnetic energy in this house, particularly around the doorway, they said. They did not have an explanation why, but they said it's particularly around the doorway. Whereas I formulated this idea some years later with talking to people. I thought there's something about these doorways that's helping this focus of energy build up, you see. So that's where I'm at with that hypothesis. It's not a proven fact or whatever, because I'm not a scientist, but I've just seen a pattern reoccurring over my investigations and research over the years.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. Does it you, Paul? I mean,
me too. Yeah, I'm just curious about also because I've had a near-death experience, and I just wondered what's your take on reincarnation? Because obviously you can talk to people when they pass over, So what's the point of when? Not the point. I mean, it's the wrong way to say it. But when does the process then go on to like reincarnation, or do they stay in one realm? What's your take on reincarnation and realms?
Okay. Well, reincarnation, I always thought it was a tin of funny tasting milk. But no. Yeah, reincarnation, it's an interesting one. There's some people that believe it and some people that don't. But I think it depends on the way you present it, because people automatically assume that you're going to reincarnate as a bird or a creature or something in the next life round. But I don't necessarily think that's the case. I've read lots of different books and what I call channeled books, where that's a spirit guide that will speak through a medium and relate like the spiritual topics of like things like reincarnation. They'll tell you how it works. Firstly, there's the thing of simultaneous time. I don't know if that's something you've ever heard. Have you? Yeah. Where everything happens at once. Yeah. So basically, there is no future. There's no past. There's only the eternal present. But it appears there. It appears to us there seems to be a history. There seems to be a past and a future. And it took me a long time to try and understand that. And I worked out an analogy to help people understand it. I said, if you remember an old 78 record, your LP that you used to buy your favorite band from Woolworths or something all those years ago, you get the LP out and you would see, if you held it up at a certain thing or the light of the window, you'd see the individual tracks or the songs on the LP. And you think, oh yeah, there's 5 tracks going across there. And there's a little thin black gap where there's silence between the songs. And then you'd flip it over and you'd see the other songs on the other side. Now, in order for you to play those songs, you'd have to put it onto a record player and put the stylus through it, and it'd go through the groove of that album, slowly playing the song round and round. Then you get to the silence where there's no music, and then you get to the next song. So I envisaged that that's a bit like past lives or reincarnation, if you like, that one song is there, that's one life. Then you got the black groovy gap where there's silence, that's between lives. And then you go on to the next song. So in order to experience those songs, you have to be on that groove, on the needle of the stylus, to experience it in a linear fashion. But you take it off the record player and hold it back up to like, you see all those songs at the same time. You see, it's just a different way of looking at it. Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, I don't play my Black Lace records anymore. So with that in mind, this spirit guide called Seth, who came through the medium of Jane Roberts, he said that yes, people do reincarnate, but you will get them like a whole village might reincarnate as a group. Like they might be part of what they call a group soul. So in the same way that you might have a pop group of different musicians playing a band together, you might get a whole load of people that will perform roles in this lifetime together. So you might have, say, a husband and wife, the kids or whatever, as a group soul or something like that. They're individual people, but they're almost like a band. And I'll say, I'll be the wife in this lifetime, you be my husband, and you be my kids. But in the next lifetime, they'll all reincarnate again. And the wife becomes the husband becomes the wife, and the sister becomes the brother. And they'll experience life again. And they'll all be playing out their different challenges to each other. I'll be the awkward git, you'll be the nice one, or whatever like that, like roles in a film. But they'll all do it from different viewpoints and in different time zones. So I do think there is a sort of thing as reincarnation. Some people don't agree on the idea of it being simultaneous time all at once, but that's fine. It makes no odds to me. You know, if you want to sort of think of it as one lifetime after another, and you can go back in time and perhaps find evidence that you lived in previous lifetimes. There's certainly evidence of kids that remember being like pilots on aircraft in the war and stuff, and they remember how the instruments were laid out, and they'll draw pictures of the aeroplanes and stuff like that. Then after about maybe 5 or 6 years, those memories will fall away and they get immersed in this lifetime. And normally the lifetime they're recounting is not long past. Like there's lots of kids that have been around that talk about previous lifetimes being in the Second World War, which means that they've only had maybe a gap of 40 to 50, 60 years between lives. Whereas other times between lifetimes, you can have gaps maybe 200 or 300 years, you see. And that's where you're less likely to have memories of a previous lifetime unless you have something like hypnosis to go back. But there's cases where people, I mean, I met a guy who was probably about 60 at the time. He said, I remember a lifetime being a German Panzer tank driver. in the Second World War, which I thought was quite interesting. So, yeah, I do believe these previous lives exist. There seems to be quite a lot of evidence for it. And the point that I get to is that when you're in the spirit world, you're all up there as a family. There's your great auntie, your grandmother, and things like that. It gets to a point where all these other souls are joining you. At what point does great auntie or whoever then go off to do another life and you never see her again? You know, that's a bit that kind of puzzles me, because there's got to be a break-off point where those people said, yeah, now I'm going to go on now to my next lifetime, so you won't ever see me. So it's almost like a second death. So you get reunited with your grandfather in the spirit world, but at some point they said, now it's time for me to reincarnate. Or do you then all reincarnate together? I don't know how that bit works, but that's where you chisel away and get to the finer points of it when you break it down like that. And you, of course, there's more questions to ask. But on a general thing, yes, I do think there is reincarnation.
I agree. Do you think as well? I mean, I've heard people say that every time you're reincarnated, that your awareness is raised, your consciousness is raised as you learn like new lessons each life. You're learning more, and your consciousness is raised each time. I don't know if you put any emphasis on that, or it's just something that I've heard reading stuff. I don't know if.
Yeah, that seems to be the kind of thing for it. I mean, again, it's a bit like going to school, and you do a whole year at one level, and then you have a break, summer holidays, and then you go back in September and you go to the next level the next year up. And again, you go up to that next level with your mates that are in the previous year. So they're all your familiar friends around you, but you're learning different lessons. And that, again, is a good analogy that you reincarnate with those same people. You might forget who they are.
Yeah.
And they're doing it slightly, but you're all learning a similar lesson. And the fact that you kind of know them, it perhaps helps, because like in the same way that you will help your mate with his times table at school and they'll help you do a drawing for your project, in that lifetime, in the next time, they'll probably be there to help you because they've got that ability. So they're there to support you and you're there to support them. That's a general kind of rule of thumb. But obviously each lifetime is perhaps different for each individual because they all come through with their different challenges. But the idea is that you keep doing these lifetimes, you become wiser and much more spiritual and advanced and things, because that's the name of the game. But where do you end up? I don't know.
And whether it's just different dimensions, you keep going. It's difficult, isn't it, to know from our perspective, you know, here on Earth, you know, to gain, you can gain enough, you know, so much knowledge, and then do we gain more as we go onto other lives and other realms? I mean, it's hard to, you know, it's these are the questions, aren't they? Big questions that need to ponder.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just humankind that's inhabiting the spirit realm. I think there's actually different, like you say, different dimensions where there's other beings that are not necessarily related to the humans, and so when you die, you won't necessarily these other beings. I mean, I remember talking to this guy on a plane. I was flying to Spain for a holiday with my family, and my son, who was very young at the time, he was sitting by the window. I was in the middle seat, and this guy got on the plane. He was dark-skinned, and I assumed he was Spanish because we're all flying back to Spain, and there was loads of Spanish people flying back to Spain on this EasyJet flight. And he got chatting to me, but it turned out, he said, I'm from Iran, but I prefer to call it Persia, but I live in London now, and I'm an architect, you know, and we got chatting. He said, what do you do? And I said, well, at the time, I ran this fairy museum in the Orkney Islands, and I did all the drawings and stuff for it. So I had a few pictures on my camera, and I was just showing the drawings I did, and I started talking about a few of the weird fairy stories that I had heard, and that made him open up. Now, he would have never said this, what I'm about to tell you, he would have never said this to anyone, but it's because he felt he could trust me. He felt that someone to tell this story to, because I said there's a lot more to this world than we know of, and I said I think scientists are just getting their hand on the door handle of this reality. We haven't opened the door fully yet. We're just literally about to open this door, but we haven't got it there. And he says, yes, I agree with you. And then he related the following story to me, which I'm sure would be of interest to you guys and your listeners. What it was, he said that, and he didn't really give a year, but based on the fact that at the time he was 47, I think this might have been somewhere in the 1980s. He said, I was a young conscript in the Iranian army. And he said, I was there with my army colleague and we had to patrol the streets somewhere in Iran. And he said that There's a lot of noise coming from next door. I don't know what's going on there. You hear a few bangs and things like that. It's not spirits. It's someone laying cables or something by the sounds of it. But anyway, he said that he was patrolling the streets one night in Iran and a sandstorm kicked up, which is very common in that part of the world. So he said, let's seek shelter. And they found this mosque. So in a mosque, you have to take your shoes off because it's a way of doing things in there. So he said they both took their shoes off. And this guy, I'll call him Hussein. I can't remember his name now, but I call him Hussein for purposes of relating the story. He said to his army buddy, look, you sleep first, and after an hour I'll have a sleep, but I'll wake you up and we'll take it in turns. So his mate fell asleep, and then Hussein sat with his back against the wall, sitting next to him, holding a gun, and he said no matter how hard he tried, he kept falling asleep and he kept drifting off. He said it happened 3 times that he drifted off and woke himself up. No, I've got to stay awake. I've got to stay awake. He said on the 3rd time he drifted off, and this time he woke up, and he said suddenly, he said there was this woman crouching down by his feet, looking at his feet. And he said there was a young girl next to the woman. He put about 9, 10, 11 years old, crouching down as well, looking at his friend's feet. And they were just staring at the feet with a curiosity sort of thing. And he thought, where the hell have these people come from? You know, what's happening? So he said he tried to wake up his friend by pressing his elbow onto his friend's chest. And he said no matter how hard he pressed his elbow, he said his friend wasn't waking up. So he said, I didn't like this. He said, I thought I was going to get out of there. I didn't like the feeling of this. So he said he started to wrap the strap of the gun that he had around his arm. So he said that, so when he ran away, the gun wouldn't swing about. I thought, you're the fellow with the gun here, you know. Surely you got control of the situation. But he was going to run away from a girl and a woman. I don't know why, you know. But he said, as soon as I started to wrap the strap around my hand, the movement of it must have made the woman look up, because he said she looked up at me. He says, as soon as I looked at her, and I looked at her in the eyes and she looked at me in the eyes, he says, I knew that she was not from this world. Something just clicked, and I knew that she was not from this world. And he said at that point then, the woman stood up and the young girl stood up, and they turned and walked away. And he said as they walked away, he noticed they both had cloven hoofed feet, rather like on a goat. And they trotted away or clip-clopped away, and he said they vanished into the wall.
Wow.
So you think, what the hell was that about? And I said to him, wow, that's absolutely fascinating. When he told me that, I had a shiver go up and down my spine. And I thought, that's really interesting, because obviously they were staring at his feet. So to them, the human feet was the odd things to look at and behold, because they'd never seen these feet before, or maybe they were aware. But this is what I'm talking about, the fact that we are being watched. And these people were watching Hussein and his friend. They were human to an extent, but they had a different evolutionary path. Can't say the word. Evolutionary path that they somehow, for whatever reason, developed these cloven hoofed feet as part of their makeup, and they existed or appear to exist in a separate level of reality. So they weren't spirits of Auntie Ethel and Uncle Bob, human spirits. These were different people in their own realm. But for some reason, they'd come through in a mosque, a holy place where maybe you do a lot of prayers. Maybe that sets up the energy. I don't know. And they come through and observed them. Which also leads on quite nicely to another story. Again, not quite Auntie Bob or Auntie Ethel visiting you from the spirit realm, but it's to do with this time of the Christian church. And many years ago, I used to work at this broadcasting company, and there was a guy from the West Indies who was a security guard that worked there. And his name was Owen. And he said that when he lived in the West Indies, and I think, but I'm not 100% certain, it was the island of St. Lucia, but I can't be sure on that, but it doesn't really matter. I'll say it's the island of St. Lucia just for the sake of argument. That he said, I was in a bar, and I used to drink with my pals in this bar, and we'd take the same route home every night. And he said one day he was walking back with his mate, and they had a few drinks, so they weren't absolutely 100% sober, but you don't hallucinate when you have drinks anyway. You just get a bit loose with your tongue maybe, and a bit wibbly wobbly. But he said he walked home with his mate, and as they walked up the hill, their normal route home, they go past a church. He said on this particular night, as they're walking through, He said they looked up at the church, and this is what struck me, because this is what got me interested in the story. I overheard him talking to a girl at work in the canteen. He said she was as white as that fridge freezer, and he was pointing to a fridge freezer in the staff canteen. So I said, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Tell me, what's this? So this is what he related to me. He says, this was a woman, he said, that was sitting on the church roof. And I laughed. I said, what's a woman doing sitting on the church roof for? And he says, she was no ordinary woman. He said, this woman was at least 50 foot tall. I went, what? He says, yeah, 50 foot tall, sitting on the church roof,
wow.
legs on either side of the church roof. And he said she had white skin, long white hair, long pale dress on. And you imagine an adult, sitting on a doll's house, either side, fairly uncomfortable, but that's what it looked like, I'd imagine. But she was at least 50 foot tall. And I always say this, no wonder they're always trying to raise money for the church roofs, because you've got these bloody giant women sitting on them all the time. So his friend who was with him was crouching behind a gravestone. So Owen said, do you see this too? He verified it, that, it wasn't just him seeing it. He goes, yeah, I can see it too, his friend said. And he was absolutely in fear, hiding behind a gravestone. So Owen, being the brave of the two, he said he picked up this rock and he said he threw it at this 50-foot woman on the church roof. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, it went straight through her. He said, but then she stood up. It obviously pissed her off a little bit. Not a good idea to throw rocks at 50-foot women. So he said that she stepped off the church and started to walk towards them as this 50-foot tall woman. Bloody scary, if you ask me. But I said, well, then what happened? He said that she shrunk in size. As she got close to them, she sort of shrunk in size to the size of a normal human, and then just sort of dissipated into the ground and vanished. And that was that. Now, again, this is a weird thing happening on a holy building, a bit like the mosque, but this is a Christian church, but they're appearing there. So what's going on? And they're not from the spirit realm that we would think of, like the afterlife. They seem to be something exceedingly different. Now, I have heard that churches, things like that, are built on ley lines, where ley lines intersect. I don't know how true that is, but they talk about energy and ley lines and stuff like that. And then I have heard that there's what they call guardians or goddesses or something that protects these sacred areas where these ley lines might be for energy, and they're like keepers of it. They protect it. And then later on, someone builds a church on it. So maybe, it's only a very loose maybe, because I can't prove it. Again, it's a hypothesis or a theory, that this goddess type lady, huge 50-foot woman, was there protecting the church. Maybe she picks up energy from the ley lines. I don't know. She recharges her batteries. Who knows? But she was sitting there. She wasn't obviously there every time they passed the church. She just happened to be there sitting on that church for that particular night that she was spotted.
Wow.
I think that was a story. But I think it goes to show as well that a lot of people have had these experiences, and I bet there's probably, we know there's going to be a lot of people who will keep it to themselves because of the fear of ridicule and and just being laughed at. So how many people out there have had these experiences but just can't find the outlet to talk about it. That was quite something. So I can imagine without that guy in the plane, it must have been great to open up to you, knowing that he was open-minded once he'd got talking to you. There must be a lot of people out there that...
Well, that's it. Yeah. I mean, I've done talks, as I said earlier, I've done talks around the country, and I was relating these kind of stories at the Probe conference, which is no more apparently now, which is in Lytham St Anne's near Blackpool. First and ever, only time I ever went to the Probe, it's about 3 years ago now. So I was telling these stories to the people there, and this lady came up to me after I told her the cloven-hooved women story in the mosque. She came up to me and she goes, I'm so glad you talked about that. And I said, why is that? And she goes, well, I had an experience in hospital where I saw something similar. I said, really? She said that she was at this hospital. She had just given birth to a baby, which unfortunately was stillborn when it was born. So they had put her in this, like, I don't know what they call the room, a mourning room, a recovery room, or prayer room or something where she could sit and be by herself, and they put the dead body of the baby in a cot next to her. And she says she's sitting on the bed, crying her heart out, thinking, how can I be strong for my family? I've got a dead baby and I've got to be strong for my family. And I'm going through this really terrible experience. And then she said, all of a sudden, the door opened of this room. She said, in March, and this sounds absolutely crazy, in March, 5 or 6 mini centaur beings. So they got like the body of a horse. Very small, though. They're not like huge beings. I think she said something like 1.5 foot high. So if you think like little prehistoric pony type things from Valley of the Gwangi or whatever the film was, the Ray Harryhausen film, they had a little miniature prehistoric horse. I'd imagine it's something that height, but it had a humanish body. But she said they weren't pretty. They were really ugly. And she said 2 of them came up and looked at her. And she said 2 of them went over to the cot where the dead baby was and just stared in at the cot at the baby. And she said they were there for some while and then they went. Now, she didn't say how they went. She didn't say they vanished. They didn't go back out the door. She just sort of said they weren't there anymore. But she said it had some sort of positive healing effect on her because she suddenly felt a lot better after that experience. So she said, again, like you're saying, there must be secrets these people harbor to themselves thinking they're crazy. But because I told that story at the program, she felt it was a safe outlet to come and tell me that story and get it off her chest. Now, you can say, oh, that's a hallucination. You were given drugs by the hospital, whatever. Maybe so. But she had to relate the story to me. And if it wasn't drugs, for instance, she might have had that experience and thought, oh, yeah, they gave me a lot of gas and air and I was given morphine to recover from it. It must have been the drugs. But no, she absolutely still questioned it all those years later to then get it off her chest to me, you see. So this is why I don't think it was drugs. I think it was possibly something she experienced. Now, whether it was absolutely there in the room or it's some psychological trick of the mind, we'll never know. But she related it as a story that she had to get off her chest to me, which in the end, it was beneficial. It actually helped her.
Right. I mean, the same with, I know you mentioned she went on drugs, but even some say certain drugs, it's not simply just hallucination. It could be a means to access them kind of dimensions or, access the spirit world a little bit more. Maybe it's a gateway, these kind of drugs can be little gateways to that. I've heard that. A lot of studies now are being put out there to say that this is the case, so even if people are saying, oh yeah, you're on drugs, well, yes, but it could well still mean that what you are seeing is what you're seeing. It still applies. So, but but to hear an account where they're stone cold sober is just incredible, isn't it? It's just absolutely amazing.
Going back to the physical mediumship, I've been reading some amazing accounts. There was who was it now? I think it was the medium Helen Duncan. I don't know if you've ever heard of her.
Oh yes, we did an interview with Ben on her.
Okay, so you kind of know the story then. That for those that don't know, that Helen Duncan was a wartime medium. She came from Scotland, but she did a lot of her demonstrations down in the Portsmouth area. And to cut a long story short, she was doing physical mediumship where she was manifesting dead sailors that were coming out of her seance cabinet and saying, I've gone down on the HMS Hood or the HMS, whatever it was. And basically the Ministry of Defence, they won't call the Ministry of Defence, the War Ministry, I think they were called, or the Navy, were basically trying to keep all this hush-hush because they didn't want the British population to know that they were losing ships. And yet here was Helen Duncan bringing back sailors that had recently died on these ships, and the word was getting out. So there was a conspiracy or a collusion of people to try and get her put away, basically. And she was tried under the Witchcraft Act. Now, that's that story aside. She did come out of prison after the war, and she carried on demonstrating. If you go to her website, there was some interesting letters that have been put up there by members of her family that still live and try and clear her name. And people have testified that they said, yeah, I've been in Helen Duncan's seances, and I saw a piper, a Highland piper, the guy that plays the bagpipes, the big sort of feathery hat, coming out of her seance room, talking in a Scots accent, playing the pipes, and he even brought a Highland pony out with him, and he said it was nodding its head like ponies do. So this is someone that's totally stone cold sober, and they're witnessing that. And you think, well, if Helen Duncan's fake, how did she get a Highland piper complete with bagpipes and a Highland pony coming out of this small little seance cabinet in a room? And then it's got to disappear after that, because she used to be accused of manifesting these spirits of having two stomachs, and saying that she was swallowing cheesecloth and she'd hide it in one stomach and bring it all up, and somehow it'd shape itself into the person, which is highly, and skeptics always go with this thing of Occam's razor.
Oh, yeah.
Go with the simplest explanation. Well, that's much more hard to believe, that you got two stomachs and you're somehow manifesting it or wrapping it up into the shape of a person. And then you've got to wrap it up into the shape of a nodding Highland pony that looks completely unrealistic, made out of cheesecloth. It doesn't, it just doesn't ring true for me. No. And the Occam's razor thing, that it's much more easier to believe that there is this psychic world that can do this sort of thing and manifest these spirits in some way that we don't fully understand the science of it. Fortunately, there are scientists out there now that are looking into it. I mean, years ago, people would wash their hands of it. There have been scientists over the years like Sir Oliver Lodge and people like that. And in more modern times, there's Gary Schwartz in America, who's done lots of experiments with spirit guides and angels as well in his laboratory. And he sort of seems to register on scopes and things like that. So he asks them to do certain things and says, right, I want you to do something, and this spirit guide will do it. And yet there's no one there, but he's got a little trick up his sleeve. And I don't quite understand the whole thing, but it's apparently when astronomers are trying to work out if there's a planet in a certain solar system that's so far away, they look at the star, and when the star dims, that means to them that there's a planet moving in front of it. Okay, so that's how they can, even though they can't see the planet, they know the planet is there in that solar system because it moves in front of it and blocks it out momentarily. So he takes that idea and he asks the spirit to block out certain lights in the room, and it'll block out certain lights in the room. And basically, to cut a long story short, that's how he knows there's spirits there. And they have an intelligence, and sometimes they take over the experiment and push it in the way that they want to do it as well. And there's been cases of Marco Bacelli, I think his name is. He's passed on himself now, but he was an Italian medium, a physical medium, that had this old wartime radio where you would hear the voices of the dead come through and speak. And they'd be speaking in their Italian language to all the people that were in the room. And yet when English people came over and visited him, suddenly the Italian voices would stop and English people would start talking through to the English people. And there was one particular scientist who was witnessing this, thinking, okay, this is fraud. I'm going to investigate this further. He unplugged it from the wall, this radio. He took out the valves. So it's a dead machine. It's not going to work. And yet still the voices came through it. And he put his ear up to the speaker and he could hear the voices still coming through, talking to their relatives in the room. And it was all unplugged from the wall. So crazy. But that's what's being claimed to have happened.
That's incredible. I don't know if you've got any more questions, but I want to put to you, Neil, how do you deal with skeptics and maybe on the skeptic thing? Because I mean, obviously in what you do and what we do as well, Paul, we do come across them a lot, and sometimes can be quite draining. How do you deal with skeptics who like just will not accept any of this? Do you just let it be, or do you just
you can debate with them, but at the end of the day, most of them are so closed-minded that we'll say, well, look, okay, you come along to this demonstration of mediumship, then they won't go to it.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if they're not going to go to these things and research them for themselves, they'll always dismiss it. They're always the experts on it, but they never actually go to these things,
Yeah.
So, you say, okay, if you know so much about it, tell me all about it. But they don't know enough about it. Yet they're somehow the experts on it and how it's done. But they've never been to any demonstration of clairvoyance. And I have the same thing with people that call themselves flat earthers. They say, oh, the earth's flat, you measure this building, measure that, but it proves it's all flat. You shouldn't see this, you shouldn't see that. And I say, tell me, what telescope do you have? And there's no answer.
Yeah.
And I say, well, the reason I'm asking you a telescope, have you observed other planets in our solar system? Have you looked at the moon through the solar system? Because when you've, like me, looked at the moon through the solar system and seen a curvature on the moon, or you've seen other planets like Jupiter and Saturn, you've seen a curvature on them as well, or Mars, or say a phase of the moon of the planet Venus, you see it in a phase, which means it's curved. You've seen that with your own eyes. I'd like to know what forces in the galaxy or the universe or the solar system is making them spherical, but making this planet that we're on flat. What's the difference? You know, if we're all subject to the same vacuum, the same gravitational forces or whatever, then surely we've got to be on a sphere as well. And even the Germans, before NASA came along, even the Germans were sending up V2 rockets.
This camera, part of a flying laboratory, is recovered by Clyde Holliday of Johns Hopkins, who prepared it for its trip to the upper stratosphere. Rivaling the fantastic imagination of Jules Verne, the camera brought back a record of a flight into the heavens of a captured German V2 rocket. At White Sands, New Mexico, the huge missile takes off. Air Force pictures show the rocket in flight, and the flying camera automatically takes over. The huge projectile drops the Earth behind at the tremendous speed of 4,000 feet per second. The rotation of the rocket causes the planet to spin before the lens, and the camera photographs the Earth 65 miles straight down. The horizon, 720 miles away, and the curvature of the Earth are astonishingly apparent in this still picture from the film. An observer in the rocket could have seen San Diego, Salt Lake City, Kansas City, and San Antonio. Approximately 1,600,000 square miles of the Earth's surface was revealed. The rocket reached the 65-mile height in 3 minutes. This giant engine of destruction, designed by Hitler to annihilate allied nations, now serves the worthy cause of peacetime research.
With cameras and looking down on a curved planet. So it wasn't a NASA conspiracy on that one, at least.
I agree with that. Yeah.
That, you know, with the flat Earth, as I say, just get a telescope. You know, things like that. So with the same thing, it's only you can only do it. At the end of the day, it's down to personal experience, and that's where it comes to. Go out there and research it yourself. And that's what I say to the skeptics.
Yeah, I agree with that. Have you got any more questions, Paul, before we wrap up?
Yeah, the things I'm interested in to know about is Neil's thoughts about archons.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I don't know too much about archons, but I know a man who can.
Okay, right.
That's a man by the name of Mr. Ronald Kinsella. Okay. Yeah, he's also a twin, Philip Kinsella as well. I think you should get him on your program because they got lots of things to talk about. One of them, Ronnie, has done a brilliant presentation on the archons. He's got lots of interesting stories to tell, but so has Philip. And Philip is a medium, but he's also a UFO researcher. And has experienced UFOs with his brother as well. So they'd be a great team to interview as well. So and I can give you their details after this. But he would be the man to ask about archons. I've heard of them. I don't want to say what I think they are because I don't know myself. It's not an area of my expertise, but I know Ronnie would be able to give some viewpoints on that at least.
That's brilliant. Yeah. Well, have that noted down, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's been great. Thank you very much, Neil. We could have gone on a lot more and with a lot more discussion and you know, all the accounts that you have, all the interesting accounts. It's probably loads, you know, that they've been so interesting to you know, have on our show and talk about and discuss. So we'd love to have you back if that's okay.
Be delighted to come on.
Because it's been a real pleasure, and I just look forward to the next chat. Really, you know. So, but thank you very much, Neil. Thank you very much for your time and everything. And,
it's a good job that we're doing this in the daylight because you don't want to hear these stories just before you go to bed.
That's a good point. Yes, I like that. That's true. Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Neil, and thank you for your time. And we'll organise a second one soon.
Absolutely.
If that's all good.
No problem at all. All right, guys.
Brilliant.
Okay, thank you, Neil.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.